Hello, welcome to her voice narrative. My name is Lillian, and today we are checking out some elders' revenge stories. Before the crack of this story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit the like button and subscribe. This story is telling us that trust should never replace vigilance, even with the people you love the most. Please listen to this story to the end. Now, let's crack on with today's story.
Before I hung up the phone, I heard something that stopped my heart cold. My daughter was still talking. Her voice was bright and happy, the kind of happy that has nothing to do with love. She did not know the line was still open. She did not know her mother was still listening. And the word she said next would change everything between us, forever. The old woman signed everything. We are finally getting out of debt. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone against my ear. My hand would not move. My feet would not move. The coffee in my cup went cold. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun was still shining, like the world had no idea that inside this house, something had just broken apart. My name is Gloria Hayes. I am 67 years old. I raised my daughter Sandra in this house with my own hands. I painted these walls. I fixed the leaky pipes under the sink when there was nobody else to call. I planted the garden out back because my husband Raymond always said a house needed something alive growing beside it. Raymond passed 8 years ago, and when he did, I thought the hardest thing life could ever hand me was already behind me. I was wrong. This is my story. And before we go any further, I want to tell you something important. What you are about to hear is real in the way that matters most. The lessons, the pain, the betrayal, and the fight back. If you are watching from somewhere out there in this big world, drop your location in the comments. I love knowing how far these words travel. Now, let us go back to the beginning. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October. Sandra had come by the house 3 days earlier, on a Saturday, with a folder in her hand and a smile on her face. She brought flowers, yellow ones, and a container of that chicken soup she knows I like. She set everything on the kitchen table and pulled out the chair across from me like she was about to have a normal conversation. "Mom," she said, "I have been talking to a financial advisor. He helped us put together some estate planning documents. Just in case something ever happens. It is better to have everything organized now while you're healthy and sharp." I remember thinking how thoughtful she was. How grown up. Sandra had always been the organized one. Even as a little girl, she kept her room neat and her school bag packed the night before. Raymond used to say that girl is going to run a company someday. He was proud of her. We both were. She spread the papers on the table and talked me through them. Durable power of attorney, she said, just means that if you ever get sick and cannot make decisions, I can step in and handle things for you. Healthcare directive means your medical wishes are written down. Standard stuff, Mom. Everybody does this. I believed her. I signed on page 4 with the blue pen from the kitchen drawer. I did not read the other pages carefully. Why would I? She was my daughter. She was the person I had wiped tears off of. The person I had stayed up with when she had nightmares. The person I had driven to piano lessons and science fairs, and her first job interview. You do not read the fine print when it is your own blood handing you the pen. She packed the papers back into the folder, kissed me on the cheek, and said she would take care of everything. She left before dinner. I warmed up the chicken soup and sat alone at the table feeling grateful that I had raised such a thoughtful child. That was Saturday. On Tuesday evening, I called to check in. Just a quick call, the kind mothers make without thinking. She picked up after 2 rings. "Hey, Mom." Her voice was warm. She sounded busy. I could hear movement in the background, plates or cupboards, something domestic. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. Nothing important. I asked about the grandchildren. She asked if I had taken my blood pressure medication. I told her about the roses out back that were still blooming even this late in the year. She said that was nice. Then I said I had to go. I said goodnight. I reached out and tapped the screen, but I missed the button. The screen did not go dark. The call did not end. And 30 seconds later, I heard her voice again, but she was no longer talking to me. She was talking to her husband, Derek. And she was laughing. The old woman signed everything. That was what she said. Then Derek said, "You're sure he did not read it all?" And Sandra said, "Oh, please. Mom never reads anything I give her. She just trusts me. That is the whole point." And they laughed together, the two of them, easy and relieved, like something heavy had just been lifted off their shoulders. I stood in my kitchen listening to my daughter laugh about the fact that she had tricked me. Then I heard Derek say, "Perfect. We get her into Sunrise Gardens next week, sell the house, clear the debt, and we are free. 1.4 million, Sandra. We are finally going to breathe again." And Sandra said, "That nursing home is 15 minutes from here. She will be fine. She does not need all the space anyway." I pressed the red button, and the call ended. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs would not hold me. Sunrise Gardens. That was the name of the place they had picked for me. I had driven past it once. It was clean enough on the outside, white walls, and a little fountain in the front. But I had also read about it in the newspaper 6 months ago. A state investigation for mishandling of resident funds. The kind of place people end up when their families need them to disappear quietly. That was where my daughter wanted to put me. Not because I was sick. Not because I could not care for myself. Because she needed the house. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. The linoleum was cold through my pants. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I had not felt since the night Raymond died. Completely alone. But here is what Sandra forgot about her mother. I am 67 years old, but I have not spent those years being soft. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after Raymond got sick the first time. I worked 32 years as a school principal. I have sat across from angry parents, incompetent teachers, school board members who thought they could push me around. I have been in rooms where people underestimated me my entire life. And every single time, I let them underestimate me. Then I showed them exactly what that mistake cost. I got up off the floor. I washed my face. I made a cup of tea. And I sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen, and I started writing down everything I remembered from that phone call. Every word. Every pause. Every laugh. Then I started thinking. Sandra had made 3 mistakes. The first mistake was thinking I would not fight back. The second mistake was talking about her plan on a phone call that was still connected. The third mistake, and the biggest one, was forgetting that I had always taught her everything she knew, including how to read when someone is lying to you, and how to build something that cannot be knocked down. The next morning I called my oldest friend, Marvella Johnson. Marvella and I go back 43 years. We met the first week of teacher training, both of us young and terrified and pretending we were not. She went on to become a family attorney, sharp as anyone I have ever known. She retired 4 years ago, but she still knows everyone in the legal world worth knowing. She picked up on the second ring. "Gloria," she said, "what is wrong?" I have known Marvella long enough that she can hear trouble in my voice before I even say a word. I told her everything. The papers, the phone call, the nursing home, the house. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Marvella said, "Gloria, listen to me very carefully. Do not touch those documents. Do not call Sandra. Do not confront anyone yet. You call me back in 2 hours. I need to make some phone calls first." I asked her what kind of phone calls. She said, "The kind that tell us exactly how much trouble your daughter has put herself in." 2 hours later she called back. Her voice was different. Quieter. More careful. She said, "I spoke to a forensic document specialist I know. Based on what you described, the way the pages look different, the spacing being off, it sounds like Sandra had you sign one page and then attach different pages to the front. Your signature is real, but the document it is attached to is not the one you agreed to." I said, "Is that a crime?" Marvella said, "That is called forgery, Gloria. And, depending on what those pages say, it could also be financial fraud and elder abuse." The words sat between us on the phone. Elder abuse. My own daughter. Marvella kept talking. She said, "I also ran a quiet check on Derek. He has business debts. A lot of them. His construction company took on a project 2 years ago that fell apart. He owes close to $900,000 across multiple creditors. They've been making minimum payments to keep the wolves at the door. I said, so this is really about Derek. Marvella said it is about both of them. But yes, the debt is his. The plan was his. And your daughter chose to go along with it. I looked out the kitchen window at the rose bushes in the backyard. Raymond had planted those with me the first spring after we moved in. Every fall I cut them back, and every spring they came back stronger. I had always taken that as a good sign. I thought about Sandra as a little girl, 8 years old, helping me deadhead the blooms in her little garden gloves, asking me why the roses had thorns. Everything beautiful has something to protect itself with, I had told her. I should have remembered that lesson applied to me too. I told Marvella I needed a plan. She said, you need more than a plan. You need a fortress. Over the next 2 days, Marvella and I worked quietly and carefully. She brought in a colleague, a younger attorney named Terrence Webb, who specialized in elder law and estate protection. He came to the house on Friday evening. No fancy car in the driveway, no big announcement. Just a quiet man with a briefcase and a legal pad who sat at my kitchen table and listened to everything I had to say. When I finished, he said, we need to do 3 things before Sunday night. First, we get a forensic document examiner to look at those papers Sandra had you sign. They will be able to prove the pages were switched. Second, we transfer ownership of this house into an irrevocable trust tonight. Once it is in the trust, Sandra cannot sell it, cannot take it, cannot do anything with it even if a judge grants her control of your finances. Third, we find out what Sandra plans to do on Monday morning, and we make sure we are already ahead of her. I said, how do we find out what she plans to do on Monday? Terrence looked at Marvella. Marvella looked at me. She said, do you have a grandchild who trusts you? And that was when I thought of Daniel. Daniel is my grandson. He is 17. Sandra and Derek's son. He has his grandfather Raymond's eyes, dark and thoughtful, and always looking at the world like he is trying to understand it rather than just move through it. He comes to my house almost every Saturday. Has done since he was 9 years old. We cook together sometimes. Or he sits at the table and does his homework while I putter around the garden. We do not always talk a lot. We just exist together, and somehow that has always been enough. I called him Friday night, after Terrence left. I kept my voice steady. Daniel, I said, can you come over Saturday morning? I want to show you something in the garden before the cold comes. He said, sure, Grandma. I will be there by 9. He showed up at 8:55. When he walked in, he looked at my face and he knew immediately that something was wrong. He set his bag down by the door and did not say anything. Just stood there looking at me with those Raymond eyes. I sat him down at the kitchen table and I poured him a glass of orange juice and I told him the truth. I did not soften it. I did not make excuses for his mother. I just told him what I had heard on that phone call, word for word. I watched his face go through 6 different things in 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, sadness, shame, and then finally, a kind of stillness. When I finished, he said, I knew something was going on. I asked him what he meant. He said, Mom has been asking me to write things down. Like if Grandma ever seems confused or forgets something. She gave me a little notebook and said it was for my health journal homework, but she kept asking about you. She asked me 3 times last month if you had gotten lost driving anywhere or forgotten what day it was. My chest tightened. I said, and what did you tell her? He said, I told her you were fine. Because you are fine. You never forget anything. I reached across the table and took his hand. Daniel, I said, I need your help. And I need you to understand that what I am asking is not small. It might feel like you are going against your parents. And I will not pretend that is easy. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, what do you need, Grandma? I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old phone I had bought that morning with cash from the hardware store. A simple one. No data plan. No connection to any family account. I need you to be my eyes and ears, I said. When your parents talk about Monday about the plan about the nursing home, I need you to record it and send me the file. Then delete the recording from the phone. Do not tell anyone. Do not text me on your regular phone. Daniel looked at the old phone in my hand for a long moment. Then he picked it up. He said she is my mom. But she is wrong. And you are my grandmother. And you matter more to me than the fear of what happens if she finds out. I stood up and pulled him into a hug. He was tall enough now that I had to reach up. He hugged me back hard, and I had to press my lips together to keep from crying. Because I knew what I was putting on him, and I hated that it had come to this. But sometimes love means protecting what you care about even when it hurts. Saturday afternoon, Terrence came back with the document examiner. Her name was Dr. Patricia Cole. She was 60, small and precise, with reading glasses hanging around her neck on a little silver chain. She spread the signed documents on my kitchen table under a portable lamp and looked at each page for a very long time without speaking. When she finally looked up, she said the signature page is genuine. The preceding pages are not part of the same original document. The ink saturation is different. The paper has slightly different fiber density. And most tellingly, the header font on the first page is not the same as the font used in the body text on the page you signed. She looked at me calmly. What you signed and what is attached to your signature are two different documents. This is forgery. I nodded. I had already known it in my bones. But hearing it from someone who could prove it in a court of law felt like the ground hardening under my feet. That night, Terrence drafted the trust documents. An irrevocable living trust. Marvella witnessed them. By 11:30 on Saturday night, we filed electronically with the state of Oregon. The confirmation came back just after midnight. As of Sunday morning, this house no longer belonged to me as an individual. It belonged to the trust. And the beneficiary of the trust was Daniel. Not Sandra. Not Derek. Daniel. Sunday morning I woke at 5. Could not sleep. I made coffee and sat on the back porch in the dark with Raymond's old cardigan around my shoulders. The garden was just visible in the early gray light. The roses were still there, waiting for winter. I thought about Sandra. Not the Sandra on that phone call, laughing about the old woman signing everything. I thought about Sandra at 4 years old, running through this backyard in her yellow rain boots, splashing in the puddles, so hard the mud went up her legs and I pretended to be angry, even though I was laughing on the inside. Sandra at 12, sitting at this same table doing her math homework, asking me why she had to learn things she would never use in real life. Because one day I had told her someone will try to convince you that 2 and 2 is 5. And if you do not know your numbers, you will believe them. I had spent 30 years teaching children to think for themselves, to question, to be careful who they trusted. And somehow I had not seen that my own daughter might need that lesson directed at herself. At 7 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Just 2 words. Recording sent. I opened the file and listened with my coffee going cold in my hands. Derek was talking to Sandra in their kitchen. His voice was loud and certain. He said everything goes in tomorrow morning. Lawyer files the guardianship petition at 9. Judge signs by afternoon. We have the movers on standby for next weekend. 15 days, and we list the house. Sandra said, "What about Daniel?" Derek said, "He will be fine. He is 17. He is almost out of the house anyway." Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I just need this to be over. I am so tired of being afraid of the phone ringing." Derek said, "By this time next week, no more phone calls from creditors. No more hiding. We will be free." There was a pause. Then Sandra said, "Do you think Mom suspects anything?" Derek laughed. He said, "Your mother is 67 years old, and she trusts you completely. She has never suspected anything a day in her life." I set the phone down on the porch railing. My hands were shaking. Not from cold. From anger. Not the hot kind of anger that makes you do stupid things. The cold kind. The kind that sharpens everything down to a point. I called Marvella. By 8 Sunday morning, Marvella was at my house. By 9, Terrence was there too. And by 10, Detective Angela Ford from the Elder Abuse Division of the Portland Police Department was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee and listening to the recording from Daniel. Angela Ford was 52, solid and quiet, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of eyes that do not miss anything. She had worked elder abuse cases for 11 years. Frank had referred me to her through a contact of Marvella, and she had agreed to come in on her day off after Marvella described what we had. When the recording ended, Angela set down her coffee cup. She said, "This is a solid case. The recording corroborates the forged documents. We also have the testimony of your grandson. And the document examiner report will be powerful in court." She looked at me. She said, "But I want you to understand something, Ms. Hayes. The moment we make these arrests, your daughter is looking at serious charges. Elder financial abuse,
Forgery.
criminal conspiracy. If convicted, she could serve 7 to 12 years. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at her steadily. I said, "Detective Ford, I am not doing this to punish Sandra. I am doing this because if I do not, what she is planning to do to me is wrong. And wrong things need to be stopped. Whatever punishment comes after that is between her and the law." Angela nodded slowly. She said, "Then here is what we are going to do tomorrow." Monday morning, 8:45. The house was clean. The kitchen table had coffee on it. Everything looked exactly as it always did. Marvella was in the hallway, just out of sight from the front door. Terrence was in the study, with the door cracked. Angela Ford was parked down the street with 2 officers. Daniel had stayed the night in his old bedroom. We had talked for a long time after everyone else left. He had asked me if I was scared. I had told him the truth. Yes, I was. But I was more afraid of what happened if I did nothing. He had said, "I am staying, Grandma. Whatever happens today." I had said, "You are your grandfather made new. You know that." He had not answered. He had just hugged me and gone to bed. At 8:58, a car pulled into the driveway. Sandra got out first. She was dressed in a dark blazer and slacks, hair pulled back, professional. She looked like she was going to an office meeting. Behind her, Derek stepped out in a gray suit. He was carrying a leather folder. They walked to the front door together. Sandra knocked. I opened it. "Mom," Sandra said, and her voice was bright and easy. "Good morning. We just wanted to stop by before we head to the lawyer. Just to check on you." I said, "Come in." I made coffee. They followed me inside. Sandra stepped into the living room and stopped. Daniel was sitting on the couch.
Mom.
Her voice changed instantly. "Why are you here?" "I thought you were at Jake." Daniel looked at her calmly. He said, "I am here because Grandma needed me." Something moved across Sandra's face. Not quite fear yet. More like the first small crack in something she thought was solid. Derek said, "Buddy, why don't you go upstairs for a bit? The adults need to talk." Daniel did not move. I said, "He stays."
Derek looked at me.
For the first time, something shifted in his expression too. His eyes moved around the room quickly, checking the corners, the doorways, the way a person does when they start to realize the room they walked into is not the room they expected.
"Sit down," I said.
My voice was the same voice I used for 32 years when a parent or a board member thought they could walk into my office and run things their way.
Calm.
Final. Not a request. They sat. I walked to the kitchen table, picked up the folder that Dr. Cole had prepared, and set it down in front of them. Sandra looked at the folder.
She did not open it.
I said, "Last Tuesday night after we said goodnight, the phone call did not end. The line was still open."
"I heard everything you said to Derek."
Sandra went very still. I said, "I heard you laugh about the old woman signing everything. I heard Derek talk about Sunrise Gardens and the house and $1.4 million. I heard every word." Sandra opened her mouth. I held up one hand, and she closed it again. I said, "Those papers you brought me 3 weeks ago. You had me sign page 4, and then you attached different pages to the front. Dr. Patricia Cole, a forensic document examiner, has analyzed those pages and confirmed they are not part of the same original document. That is forgery, Sandra." Silence. Derek said, "That is not." I said, "I am not finished." He closed his mouth. I said, "Marvella, please come in." Marvella stepped in from the hallway holding a printed copy of the trust documents. I said, "As of midnight Saturday, this house no longer belongs to me. It was transferred into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiary is Daniel. You cannot sell it. You cannot use it to pay debt. You cannot touch it. Even if a judge granted you control over my finances today, which they will not, This house would not be part of what you could access. Sandra looked at the trust documents. Her face had gone from pale to something worse. The look of someone watching a plan collapse in real time, piece by piece, each part falling that they had believed was solid. Derek said, "You cannot just do that without." Terrence Webb stepped in from a study doorway. He said, "She can," and she did. The trust was legally executed and filed on Saturday night. It is fully recorded with the state. Would you like a copy of the confirmation number? Derek stood up. He said, "This is ridiculous. We were trying to help you." "You are not thinking clearly, Gloria. You never think clearly. That is the whole reason we were trying to get things organized for you." I looked at him. I said, "You owe $900,000 to creditors across 3 companies. You have been hiding it for 2 years. This plan was never about helping me. It was about saving yourself using my house as the money." Derek's face went red. He said, "You have no idea what you're talking about." I reached into my pocket and set the small recorder on the coffee table. I pressed play. Derek's voice filled the room. The recording Daniel had sent me the night before.
Clear and damning.
Everything goes in tomorrow morning. Lawyer files the guardianship petition at 9. Judge signs by afternoon. We have the movers on standby for next weekend. 15 days, and we list the house. The room went silent. Sandra was not looking at Derek. She was looking at Daniel.
"Daniel," she said.
Her voice had changed completely.
It was small now.
Barely a whisper. "You did that? You recorded us?" Daniel looked at his mother. He said, "You asked me to keep a notebook of every time Grandma seemed confused. You were going to use me to lie in court about her. I was not going to do that." Sandra pressed her hand over her mouth. Derek said, "This is entrapment. This is illegal. You cannot." Angela Ford walked through the front door. She said, "Mr. Morrison, I am Detective Angela Ford, Portland Police. I would advise you to stop talking right now." She had 2 officers with her. They stood just inside the doorway, calm and ready. Derek looked at the officers. At Angela. At Marvella. At Terrence.
At me.
I watched him calculate his options in real time and come up empty. Angela said, "Sandra Hayes Morrison and Derek Morrison, I am placing you both under arrest on charges of elder financial abuse, forgery, and criminal conspiracy." Sandra did not fight. She did not run. She stood up from the couch, and she looked at me with her eyes full of tears, and she said, "Mom." Just that one word.
Mom.
And I looked back at her, this woman I had carried inside me and brought into the world and raised and loved with everything I had. And I said the only honest thing I had left to say to her. "You made this choice, Sandra. Not me." Angela cuffed them both. She was professional and quiet about it, the way good officers are. She guided them toward the door. At the threshold, Sandra turned back one more time. She looked at Daniel. She said, "I am sorry, baby. I am so sorry." Daniel did not answer. He sat on the couch and watched his mother be walked out the front door, and he held himself together with everything he had. I sat down beside him and put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me, and we sat there together while the sound of the police cars faded down the street and the house settled around us into quiet. The trial came 4 months later. Marvella and Terrence built a case that was about as tight as anything I had ever seen. The forensic document report, the recordings, the financial evidence showing Derek debt, the text messages on Sandra's phone from their lawyer confirming the guardianship filing date, Daniel testimony, which he gave from the stand in a voice that did not waver once. I gave a victim impact statement too. I stood at the front of the courtroom and I said, "My name is Gloria Hayes. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a school principal because I believed in something. I believed in showing young people what honesty looks like, what integrity feels like, what it means to stand up for what is right even when it is hard." I paused. I said, "I also spent my life loving my daughter, and I thought that love was returned the same way, with honesty, with care, with the knowledge that family does not use each other as tools." I looked at Sandra sitting at the defense table. She was not in the blazer and slacks this time. She was in a plain gray dress, and her hair was loose, and she looked like someone who had not slept in a month. I said what my daughter and her husband did was not desperation. It was a plan. A careful, deliberate plan that took months to build. They forged documents. They targeted my trust. They intended to take my home, take my freedom, and erase everything I have spent a lifetime building. I paused again. I said, I am asking this court to hold them accountable. Not because I want revenge, but because what they did was wrong. And wrong things need to be answered for. That is what I always taught. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Osei, watched me with calm, steady eyes the whole time I spoke. Sandra was convicted on 2 counts of forgery, 2 counts of elder financial abuse, and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. Derek was convicted on 1 count of elder financial abuse and 1 count of conspiracy. Sandra received 7 years. Derek received 5. They were led out of the courtroom by officers. Sandra looked back at me once, just briefly, and then she looked away. I sat in that courtroom, and I did not feel victorious. I felt the way I imagine a doctor feels when they give a very bad diagnosis. They had to do it. It was the right thing. But there is no joy in it. That night, I sat on the back porch alone with a cup of chamomile tea. The roses were there, bare now in the cold, just the thick canes waiting for spring. Raymond used to sit out here with me after the hard days. The days when everything at work had gone sideways, or when one of the kids was struggling, or when the world just felt too heavy. He never tried to fix everything. He just sat beside me in the quiet. I missed that man every single day. I sat there, and I thought about Sandra at every age I had ever loved her. And I allowed myself to feel the grief of it. The real grief, not the anger, not the betrayal, just the pure sadness of losing someone who is still alive. Because that is what it felt like. A loss. After a while, the back door opened and Daniel came out. He sat down in Raymond's chair without asking, the way he always did, and we looked at the garden together in the dark. He said, "Are you okay, Grandma?" I said, "Not yet, but I will be." He said, "Is it okay that I am still sad about Mom?" I said, "It is more than okay. It would be wrong if you were not." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too, baby." We sat there until the cold drove us inside. The weeks that followed were strange. The house was quiet in a way it had not been in a long time. Daniel stayed with me, sleeping in his old room, going to school from my house each morning. He talked about applying to Portland State to study criminal justice. He said he wanted to help people who could not protect themselves. I told him his grandfather would have been very proud. Marvella came by every few days. Not always for legal reasons. Sometimes just for coffee and conversation, the way old friends do when they know someone needs company without needing to say so. She brought magazines I would never read and told stories that made me laugh out loud, and sometimes that was the best medicine. Terrence called when there were legal updates. He told me that an investigation had been opened into several other families in similar situations, people whose elderly relatives had been targeted by guardianship schemes. He said the recordings and documents from my case had helped build a broader picture. Detective Angela Ford stopped by twice to update me on proceedings. She was quiet and thorough the way she had been from the start. On her second visit, she sat at my kitchen table and said, "Ms. Hayes, in 11 years of working these cases, I want you to know that what you did took courage. Most people do not fight back. Most people do not even realize what is happening until it is too late." I told her I almost did not fight back. I told her about sitting on that kitchen floor the night I overheard the call, legs giving out, the cold linoleum, the refrigerator humming. She said, "The difference between people who survive this and people who do not is not whether they fall. It is whether they get back up." I thought about that for a long time after she left. 3 months after the sentencing, I received a letter. It was handwritten on plain white paper in Sandra handwriting. She wrote slowly when she was being careful, her letters neat and upright. I recognized it immediately. I made a cup of tea before I opened it. The letter was 4 pages. She did not make excuses at the beginning. She started by saying she knew excuses would not help. She said she had been sitting with what she did every single day and that the weight of it was heavier than anything she had ever carried. She wrote about Derek debt. How it had started with one bad project and spiraled over 2 years into something that felt impossible to escape. She wrote about the fear she had lived with, the constant dread of the phone ringing, of letters in the mail, of Derek coming home with another piece of bad news. She wrote about feeling desperate and trapped and choosing the worst possible way out. She wrote, "I told myself I was doing something practical. I told myself you would be fine in the home. That it was not so different from what would happen eventually anyway. I used every lie I could find to convince myself that what I was planning was not as terrible as it was. And the worst lie of all was that you were already old enough that it would not matter as much." She wrote, "That is the most shameful thing I have ever thought. You are my mother. It matters completely. Everything about you matters completely." She wrote about Daniel. She said she knew what she had tried to use him for was unforgivable, and that whatever relationship she had with him when she got out was something she would have to earn back slowly and humbly, if he ever chose to give her that chance. She wrote, "I do not expect you to forgive me, Mom. I am not writing to ask for that. I am writing because you deserve to know that I understand what I did. Really understand it. Not just the legal part, not just the punishment, the human part. What I tried to take from you was not just a house. It was your life, your independence, your dignity, everything you built. And I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry." She signed it just Sandra. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in Raymond's desk drawer, the one where I keep the things that matter. I did not write back. Not yet. But I did not throw it away. 6 weeks after the letter, Daniel asked me if he could visit his mother at the facility. I drove him there. I waited in the parking lot. He was inside for 45 minutes. When he came back, he got into the passenger seat and sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, "She cried the whole time. She asked me to forgive her. I told her I was working on it. I told her it was going to take time." I said, "That is an honest answer."
He said she asked about you.
She said she hoped one day you would be able to talk to her again. I stared at the road ahead through the windshield. I said, "One day." He nodded. We drove home in quiet. I want to tell you something now because I have been thinking about how to say this since I started telling you this story. Forgiveness is not a door that opens all at once. It is more like a garden. You have to tend it slowly. You have to be patient with the seasons. And you cannot rush what is not ready to grow. I am not ready yet, but I am not closed either. What I know is this. I am 67 years old. I have buried a husband. I have raised children. I have built a career and a home and a life that meant something. And when everything I built was threatened, I did not crumble. I did not give up. I got back up off the kitchen floor, and I fought. Not out of pride. Not out of revenge. Out of love. Love for Raymond, who built this house with me. Love for the memories inside these walls. Love for Daniel, who deserved a grandmother who is still here and still free. And yes, even still, love for Sandra. The complicated, painful, enduring kind of love that does not stop just because someone has broken your heart. Love does not mean letting yourself be destroyed. That is what I want you to hear most clearly today. Love does not mean handing over your power to someone just because they share your blood. It does not mean signing papers without reading them. It does not mean trusting blindly when something inside you is whispering to slow down and look more carefully. Love and vigilance are not opposites. 8 months after the arrests, I started something that I had been turning over in my mind since the very beginning. I called it the Raymond Hayes Foundation, named after my husband because he was the most honest person I ever knew, and he would have wanted his name attached to something that fought for honesty. The foundation works with elderly people in the community who are at risk for financial exploitation. We help them understand legal documents before they sign. We connect them with attorneys who review estate planning papers independently. We train their trusted family members and friends to recognize warning signs. And we provide a confidential line that anyone can call if they think something is wrong. Marvella runs the legal side. Terrence helped us structure the nonprofit filing. Angela Ford sits on our advisory board. And Daniel, at 17 years old, volunteered to help with our first community information session. He stood up in front of 40 people in a church hall and told his story.
His voice was steady.
He talked about the notebook his mother had given him, about what she had asked him to do, about the choice he made to protect his grandmother instead. When he finished, a woman in the third row was crying. She came up to him afterward and said, "My son is doing the same thing to me. I did not know how to stop it, but now I do." I watched Daniel hand that woman Terrence's card, and I thought, there it is. That is why we do this. There is one more thing I want to tell you. On a Saturday in late spring, 7 months after everything ended, I was working in the garden. The roses had come back, the way they always do. Pink and yellow and one deep red one at the end that Raymond had always called the stubborn one, because no matter how hard the winter was, it always came back first. Daniel was sitting on the back steps doing something on his phone. It was warm enough to have the door open. The birds were making noise in the old oak at the back corner of the yard. I straightened up from trimming and looked at the garden. All of it. The roses, the lavender edge, the herbs along the fence that I always meant to cook with more, and somehow never did. Raymond used to say, "You know what this garden is, Gloria? It is proof. It is proof that you showed up year after year and did the work. Even when the winter was hard. Even when you did not know if things would come back. You just kept doing the work." I stood there in the warm spring light, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt okay. Not perfect. Not whole in the way I was before all of this.
But okay.
Standing here. Still in my house. Still free. Still myself. Daniel looked up from his phone. He said, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "Your grandfather." He said, "He would have loved seeing you fight back like that." I said, I think he would have. But I also think he would have told me to be careful about being too proud of myself. Daniel smiled. "That is very Grandpa." We both laughed. Real laughter. The uncomplicated kind. I went back to the roses. I have been telling you this story for a reason. Elder abuse is real. It happens in quiet houses and loving families and behind closed doors where nobody expects it. It does not always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it looks like a daughter bringing flowers and chicken soup and a folder of papers that just need your signature. The signs are there, if you know what to look for. Someone pressuring you to sign documents quickly. Papers that appear at just the right moment when a family member is facing financial trouble. Questions about your memory that feel more like gathering evidence than concern. Being pushed toward decisions that would take away your independence or control over your own property. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do not sign anything you have not had time to read. Do not sign anything that has not been reviewed by an attorney you chose yourself, not one suggested by the person handing you the papers. Call a trusted friend outside of the situation. Trust that quiet voice inside you that says, "Slow down." And if you're already in a situation like the one I was in, know this. It is not too late to fight back. Document everything. Save every recording, every message, every letter. Find a lawyer. Contact Adult Protective Services or your local police department elder abuse unit. You are not overreacting. You are not being difficult. You are protecting yourself. And you are allowed to do that. You have always been allowed to do that. Raymond used to say, "Gloria, the strongest structure in the world is not one that never gets tested. It is one that gets tested and holds." This house held. I held. And whatever comes next, I will keep holding. If this story moved you, if it made you think about someone you love, someone older, or someone more vulnerable, share it. Let them hear it. Let them know they are not alone and they are not without options. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from today. And if you or someone you know has been through something like this, I would love to hear that they are okay. This story is for anyone who ever felt like they were too old to matter, too trusting to fight back, too tired to start over. You are not too old. You are not too trusting. And it is never too late. My name is Gloria Hayes. I built my life with my own hands. And when someone tried to take it, I built it back stronger. Thank you for being here with me today.